Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing a compilation of ghost stories and hauntings. Let's get into it.
Story 1. I lived in this small hometown in northwestern New Mexico, where I lived in a house that I rented for a short time. I remember moving in and the landlord never did mention anything happening in this house, so I had no idea what I was in for. The first few months living there was quiet and nothing out of the ordinary until one day I started to feel like I wasn't alone. Some friends had come over for a housewarming party. I had never had any feelings of not being alone until some friends had come over this night. I wasn't the one who had the experience this one night though. One person happened to fall asleep on the couch in the living room while everyone else were asleep on the floor. I was in the bedroom. Everyone was sound asleep until this person happened to jump up and yell out, "Help!" We all jumped up half asleep trying to figure out what happened, asking this person what happened and if he was dreaming. Just looking at his face you could tell he wasn't dreaming, as pale and scared as he was. After he calmed down a little bit, we were able to finally hear what he was trying to tell us. He had said that he was sleeping and he could feel someone grab him by the shirt. He thought it was just one of us in the house messing with him. He tried telling this person to leave him alone. He was sleeping. It didn't stop. He said whoever or whatever it was started to shake him vigorously, that he woke up and saw a figure, but it had no face. It was just black in the face. When he awoke from being shaken and screamed out for help, he said the black figure just faded into the shadows inside the house. We don't know what he saw, nor did I ever see this figure while living there, but he said he knows what he saw and swears he wasn't dreaming. I've never seen or experienced anything of any sorts like this before. I had company over, so I don't know if it was because I had people over or not. He left and never came to visit after this happened to him. Story 2. My story starts way back when I was 4 or 5. I would always wake up with pots and pans banging and the cabinet doors slamming. I had siblings, but only 2, and this would happen to me every morning. When I would wake up, everyone was sound asleep, and I would be the only one awake. I would sometimes wake up my mom, but when I did, she told me that she couldn't hear anything, and for me to go back to sleep. I never wanted to get up and check because I always had a bad feeling about it. But at the time, I didn't know what was happening to me. A few years passed, and all of a sudden they stopped, and I never heard those noises again. Then when I was 11, it got worse, way worse. I started seeing and hearing things. I should have mentioned this earlier, but my mom told me that when I was 3, I got possessed. I don't know anything about this, but what my mom told me. She says that I was, and she heard me growl, and not the normal kind, but she started praying, and the growling got even louder. Then she started speaking in tongues, and a black thing came out of me and ran out the door, and when it ran out the door slammed shut. But back to my story. The things I was seeing were demons, and the things I started hearing were voices. I don't know where it all came from. There were times where I would be lifted off my bed, and there were times when I would get touched or scratched, and where they touched me there would be a big red mark. But it got so bad I had to take high doses of meds to stop hearing the voices and the things I was seeing, but I can still feel a presence. Can anyone tell me how to deal with this? Can I control it? Story 3. This is a true story that happened at one of my friends' sleepovers. After my friends and I were done talking about the regular things girls would talk about at sleepovers, we decided to do something scary. I knew that my friend Hannah was trying to be brave, as paranormal stuff isn't really her thing. There was me, Tashina, Hannah, Brianna, Elena, and Autumn doing the Bloody Mary. We all decided to do it together because we searched up stories about Bloody Mary, and some of them didn't end up good. It was around 12 that night, and soon we finally had the guts to do it. We scavenged her house for candles, and we found one in the kitchen. We made our way into the bathroom, closing the door and turning off the lights. We repeated all together, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. After about 2 minutes, nothing happened. Then we got bored, so we turned to the door. We heard a voice. "My sweeties, you can't leave." I turned around and saw a woman, white dress and long black hair. She had blood all over her dress. She began walking towards us. You might be like, how can she walk to you? Isn't the bathroom small? Well, Autumn's bathroom was huge. She smiled evilly and began reaching out to Tashina. Tashina screamed and hit her with the toothbrush. I immediately turned the knob and ran out the door, my friends following. We never, and I mean never, talked about that day ever again. It still haunts me to this day, knowing we summoned up a spirit that could have possibly killed us. Story 4. I have been serving in the United States Air Force for approximately 8 years now, and I have seen my fair share of the world. Each new place I visited has brought me new and exciting experiences. The same cannot be said for the base I'm currently stationed at. I will give you 2 stories from this location. I'm currently stationed at a base in eastern New Mexico, a few miles from the Texas border. I was previously stationed there from September 2014. I returned to this installation in 2015 after a year spent in South Korea. Prior to my return, my wife had gotten us a home on the base. This home we lived in was temporary due to new homes being built on the off-base housing complex. These older homes were built, I believe, in the 1960s and had been inhabited by many military families. Due to my job on the base as military police, we patrol all over the installation. I have typically worked the night shifts, so most of the base has always made me uneasy. Now, due to the age of the homes, you can assume lots of things within these homes have happened. I know we have had suicide attempts all the way up to a murder that happened a few years ago. Needless to say, strange things go on there. I'd approximately been home for a few months when we had our first experience at our house. This was one of the first times in my career that I was assigned to work days, so I had to typically be up by 4 a.m. I woke up to what I thought was my wife getting out of bed, eyes half open. I felt her walk by the edge of the bed and out into the hallway. I looked at my clock and it wasn't even 3:30 a.m. yet. I asked her what she was doing and she responded with trying to sleep. I rolled over and she was still in bed. I told her that I thought she got up, but she had thought I did. We both couldn't go back to sleep at this point. The following morning I was woken up again at the same time. My wife was at work, so I had the house to myself. I awoke to a strange noise. Our bedroom door was always left halfway open for our dogs to get out. I looked down from the bed and both our dogs were staring at the hallway. As they looked back at me, I looked up just in time to see a man walk by my bedroom and down the hall to the living room. I jumped out of bed and went into the living room to make sure no one was there. The house was empty. As I stated earlier, that home was temporary, so we moved into our new home in a complex right off base. This property is owned by the Air Force and is considered part of the installation. In the back of this complex, there is a small cemetery that is widely known as the Children's Cemetery. Bodies buried there are from the 1800s and vary in age. It is believed that the land this housing complex sits on was once a cemetery, and upon the USAF's purchase of it, they moved some of the bodies to the Children's Cemetery. There are locals who are mad that the Air Force continues to build on sacred land. For the sake of this story, I will leave all of the other experiences of this housing area out until a later time. I'll just tell you about our new home. Compared to our previous home, the new one is 2 stories and is attached to another house. So due to paper-thin walls, you can occasionally hear your neighbors. About a week into living there, I woke up around 3:30 a.m. again while my wife was at work. A sliver of light from the street light outside shined into our bedroom, and I saw a child-sized shadow standing at the edge of my bed. I stared at it for a few seconds until it walked back into the corner of the room. I immediately turned on my light and saw nothing. My wife would complain to me that while I was at work, she could hear someone walking around downstairs. Typically, she would think it was me stopping home real quick, but that was never the case. I ended up switching back to night shift to spend more time with her. A few months had passed and nothing strange had happened. One Saturday morning, a coworker of mine stopped by our house to take us to go pick up a new bed for our spare bedroom. Both of our cars would not be able to fit in, so we asked to use his pickup. I ended up opting out of going due to an appointment in our bathroom. Upon finishing my business, I take long poops, I heard a little girl's voice calling my name from downstairs. I figured my wife was home and they needed help getting the bed upstairs. I heard hello and Frankie a few times until I stepped out and said, "I'll be done in a second." I walked back downstairs to my wife and Buddy walking into the house. I asked her when they got home and she told me they just pulled up. I said, "You weren't here 5 minutes ago?" She replied, "No, why do you ask?" I proceeded to tell her what I just heard. Another few months had passed and still nothing other than someone moving around downstairs. We had grown relatively used to that and chalked it up as our neighbors until one night when I had fallen asleep in my man cave. My wife typically got mad at me for falling asleep in there and would normally wake me up to have to go back to sleep in our room. So when I woke up to a knock at the door, I didn't expect much. I originally woke up to just a genuine weird feeling. I heard that knock and said, "I'll be in the room in a minute." I then heard footsteps walk back to our room. So I immediately got up, turned off my TV, and left the man cave. By the time I got into our bedroom, only a couple of minutes had passed. When I walked in, my wife was sacked out and deep asleep. I woke her up and apologized to her for sleeping in the man cave and having her to wake me up. She asked me what I was talking about. I told her, and she responded that she hadn't got out of bed. I asked then who knocked on my door. Due to her being half asleep, she said, "Obviously not me." I, at the point, got shivers down my spine, and after it took for a few minutes to realize what happened, we ended up not going back to sleep until the sun started to come up. Since that night, nothing has really happened there. I have many more experiences from there, specifically the housing complex. Some of us like to ghost hunt on the creepier parts of the base, but I'll leave those stories for another time. Story 5. So this starts out when I was about 8 in Fountain, Colorado. I laid awake on my side one night in the living room, camping out, and felt incredibly uneasy and had a cold, tingly sensation when it felt like someone had just touched my shoulder. No one was around, so I brushed it off. A couple of weeks later, I was in the living room when my sister started screaming and ran behind me down the stairs and threw herself into a corner, sobbing hysterically, saying something talked to her in her room. I honestly didn't believe her. We ended up moving to Alamogordo, New Mexico, when I was about 11. Sometimes doors would slam, and seeing as my grandma had passed away right after we moved there, we all just laughed it off and said Grandma was letting us know she was still there. Little things here and there, nothing big, so it never really seemed like anything to me. Fast forward to 16, I got married very young, mainly to just get away from my parents, and me and my husband found out I was pregnant about a week later. The day after finding out about the baby, we found a place of our own to move into. We were living with his mom. We thought things were falling into place. When we moved into the home, there was a storage shed out back, and the landlord said the previous people moved out and left most of their stuff, and that anything we found we could have. We found these matching pink and blue stuffed animal pigs that were also piggy banks. Every time you dropped a coin in, it made a cute little sound. Things changed after that. One of the piggy banks would go off at all times of the night randomly. Things started moving. One day I threw out a box of Lucky Charms, and the next day it was back in the cabinet, still empty. Random bags of marijuana would appear, and my husband had quit smoking since I had found out I was pregnant, and I was almost always with him, so I knew it wasn't him. Our back door would be open every single morning, still locked. Every night I would pull the door as hard as I could to make sure it was shut. I'd even push on it. It was shut, but it was always locked and open in the morning. One night I felt really uneasy and couldn't sleep, and we had a black light in our bedroom by the door. I laid awake looking at it when I heard a noise. The doorknob started turning and slowly the bedroom door opened. I woke my husband and he went to investigate, but there was nothing. I went to the restroom one night and heard a man's voice say, "Hey," like it was right next to me, clear as day. Shortly after that, I lost our baby and we moved out. Nothing happened for years. We ended up getting pregnant again, and about a month after finding out I was pregnant, we split up and ended up getting a divorce. The last time he saw our daughter, he said he took pictures of her and saw weird things in them, like a white spot, the same spot in the same area in every picture he took of her. She is almost 3 now, and sometimes she wakes up in the middle of the night and just stares at the wall and laughs uncontrollably for about an hour. In the pitch dark, just laughs. Her toys are constantly going off by themselves, and about 8 months ago in the middle of the night, I woke to a loud crashing noise. When I went into the living room, a shelf on the wall had fallen off, but the anchors holding it up were still intact. It was like someone had picked it up off the bars and dropped it. I'm starting to believe something is following me.
Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. I am a mother of a 13-year-old daughter. Every night for about 8 days now, she wakes up at 5:18 a.m. crying. Last night she woke up shaking and crying. She said her arm hurt. She was nauseous and dizzy. Upon inspection of her arm, there was 3 clearly defined bite marks. The teeth marks were on her left lower arm and was very red spread across her forearm. I did check to make sure it wasn't her teeth impressions. I instantly started to pray. The more I prayed, I could hear a growling and hissing getting louder and louder. My protectiveness of my daughter kicked in, and I continued to pray until the growling and hissing stopped. It took about half an hour. This morning my daughter was still shaken by her experience. I did ignite some dry sage and smudged the house. As I was smudging, the smoke would go mainly where I aimed it. There was one spot where the smoke would tornado or swirl in circles. I kept trying to smudge that area. The smoke always kept going towards me instead. I figured that was where the area of concern was. I was persistent and redid the room to ensure it was gone. I left the sage burning in a room and closed the door, maybe thinking now I should have left the door open. But afterwards, I went back into her room and saw a projection of her laying in her bed. I have seen her projection before while she was sleeping, but never before while she was awake. I'm unclear what this means. I'm unsure what else to do. Story 2. This occurred sometime in late summer or early fall in 1998. I was a senior in high school and my 2 best friends were sisters. One was a year older than me. Jane, the other Kat, a year younger. Jane had gone off to college, leaving us 2 younger girls to make our own fun. We lived in a very rural community with not much going on. The 3 of us were different from the FFA kids, or athletes at school. We preferred art, music, vintage clothes, and anything weird we can get our hands on. This includes the Ouija board. The summer before Jane had left for college, the 3 of us did a lot of experimenting with the Ouija board. We thought we knew what we were doing, being respectful, always say goodbye, etc. However, this could not be further from the truth. This story doesn't directly involve the board, but I've always wondered if it has something to do with what Kat and I experienced one night. When you're young, I have a driver's license and live in a small town. You often take drives for fun. At least in the 90s we did. Kat and I would take my car, a 96 Nissan, to local cemeteries and talk for hours on occasion. We'd just sit in the car, listen to music, and chat like proper weirdos, hanging out at the cemetery. One evening, after dark, we decided to make the 10-mile drive to a neighboring town cemetery. This town is very much like our own, but maybe an eighth of the size, about 200 people. The cemetery sits up on a hill about a mile off the town, the first turn off the highway, through a residential area and around a bend which takes you up the hill. As soon as we hit the city limits around the corner, I slammed on my brakes to avoid hitting a dog sitting right in the middle of my lane. It was an older dog, probably a blue heeler, with cloudy eyes and gray around the muzzle. He got up and stiffly wandered to the side of the road to get out of our way. Kat and I continued up the road to our destination, another few minutes by the car. We'd never been to this cemetery before, so we weren't sure what to expect. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, and we were unimpressed. No lights anywhere. We were too uncomfortable to get out of the car. We exchanged a quick dialogue like, "This sucks, let's go home." And before I could put my car into reverse, we heard the most blood-curdling, vicious, loud barking and growling in the car. 2 brief but very distinct barks and snarling. coming from what sounded like the back seat. The windows were up, the music was off, and in our horror and shock, that what the hell moment, quickly turned around to see if someone or somehow the dog from down the road had magically jumped into the car. There was nothing there. I peeled out of the parking lot and headed down the hill, expecting to see a dog just outside of the cemetery grounds. Nope. As we made our way down the hill, sure enough, the same dog we encountered on the way up was in the middle of the road again. Again, I slammed on my brakes to avoid hitting him, and he wandered to the side of the road. Looking in the rear view, he went back to the same spot, almost like he was guarding something. Perhaps the cemetery, I'm not sure. We rounded the bend back into town and back to the highway towards home. Kat and I had no explanation for the sound, just that it sounded exactly like a very angry dog in the back seat for 3, maybe 2 seconds. Was it a warning just to get out of there? Was the dog on the road an apparition of the snarls and barks we heard? Did we unleash something with the Ouija board, and it was angry we were just hanging around in cemeteries? Whatever it was, it scared the bejesus out of us. We never returned to that cemetery. Story 3. When I was young and scrappy, I lived in a lovely, large home in North Portland's historically red-lined Deckham neighborhood. I have no clue when the home was built, or who lived there before I shared the house in the early 2000s. All 6 to 8 housemates were artists of some sort, and there were usually lots of people in and out of our place. The other roomies had lived there a couple years before me. We often had travelers overnight and hosted rock shows in our basement. It was mostly good fun, if crowded and noisy sometimes. Everyone was welcome. In fact, I'm not sure if I ever had or needed a key. The housemates joked about a ghost which had said hello once, but I figured that they were fronting to prove who was the toughest. I also felt that there was often enough partying involved to count on anyone having clearly recalled or experienced anything. Our many cats would fixate on walls or seem to avoid certain stairways, but cats are weird, so that was meh to me. I had no incidents or issues of my own directly. My friend Max came over one festive evening. We spent most of the evening downstairs in my room splitting a bottle with another pal. Although his Marine Corps training usually came through, Max was wobbling as he tried to get out the front door. So the friend and I decided to stagger several blocks to his home, one on each side. As I lifted up his arm over my shoulder, he looked at me all drunk and serious and said, "Who is the kid on the stairs staring with the curly hair?" I looked and said, "No one is there now." The house was full of people I did not know, dancing and celebrating, so it could have been anyone. Max sighed and said all matter of fact, "I mean the ghost of the kid, right there, staring." That night was one of the Drunken Fool record books, so I dismissed what he said. In normal daylight, sober, he does not talk about silly things like ghosts or answer my question if he remembers. When my biggest, toughest brother was 17, he came to visit. One day while I was at work, he saw the cats acting funny like a ghost came into the living room. Any hints of which I had specifically not mentioned to him, as he was himself a fraidy cat and very likely not to visit. So I was not sure what to give his cat experience up to, although he at least was sober. I told him it was his imagination. I was never afraid or weirded out in that home, but afterward, he refused to be alone there. The house had 3 floors. The space I rented was one area of the basement. On principle, and as usual, when I moved in, I claimed my little space and neutral intentions out loud. I also negotiated what I hoped was a truce with the enormous deadly spiders. Mikey had the opposite basement portion. In the larger open area was laundry and band staging for shows and practices. Mikey was a drummer and had some things there, but lots of bands came through to practice or perform, and each brought their own gear and instruments. This involved getting everything down the basement steps, so for big drums or speakers, a couple people would have to help, even with the hand cart on the steps. One average gray Friday afternoon, a noisy band of fashionable rough guys arrived from out of town. They said their hellos and began moving instruments and gear downstairs to set up. I was in the living room on the main floor, sitting on the sofa. The familiar smell of rainy leather and loose tobacco filled the house. I went on about my sitting. Mikey and his friend, Nacho, were helping the band maneuver a very large, expensive speaker into place downstairs. Suddenly those 6 sturdy, armed young punks came tripping and yelling over each other, running lickety-split up the stairs like cartoons. One of them kept running right on out the front door. Nacho was just gibbering all wild-eyed. One dude, also fully tattooed, wearing spikes, kept saying, "I don't even care if we dropped it. I don't even effing care," over and over. Mikey was actually bent with his hands on his knees, like he had run a race, glasses askew. They were all talking at once, freaked out, hands flapping like a church choir. It took a minute to sort out what actually happened. They had dropped the amp. Everyone had dashed pell-mell upstairs, shouting the basic and basically pissing themselves. While downstairs, 4 of them were holding the largest speaker, which was off and unplugged, when all of them heard an amplified male voice come through it, saying calmly, "I just want you to know, you're not alone down here." Story 4. To begin, I'm not a professional storyteller or writer. This stuff did happen, and I absolutely detest people who make up stories or deceive for attention. In 2002, my mom and stepdad bought a house in the neighborhood I grew up in, after living in an apartment and split in custody with my dad for 5 or 3 years. The location I'll keep unnamed. The neighborhood was planned, and all of it was built on old orchards and abandoned farmland, which goes way back to old Oregon settlers, as this was the valley down from the mountains. For about 2 years, we never noticed anything strange or weird, much less even thought about a 4-year-old house being haunted or anything like that. I believe the first activity happened over summertime. My brother, friend, and I were at my dad's house, which was a few miles away. My brother went back to my mom's to grab something, but he never came back. Later we found out from my brother doesn't talk about the thing that scared him, that my brother, let's call him Jake, had gone up the stairs and was going to his room in the dark. It was nighttime, and he heard a young girl's voice say, "Hey Jake," from the bathroom, which was adjacent from the hallway to his room. He apparently heard it loudly and very clearly, and sprinted into his room, slammed the door, and slept with the lights on. The next day he'd asked my mom if it was her, and she denied being awake at the time. Things became more concentrated after the incident with my brother, and would continue for another 10 years on and off. Our friend Tony said while he was sleeping in our game room upstairs, the largest open space area in the house, he felt someone stroking his hair and heard breathing. He thought it was us messing with him, and had gotten up, realized the TV was shut off because it was pitch black, and he was so freaked out he ran downstairs and slept on the couch in the living room. At the time I was 16 and my brother and Tony were 15. A few months after that little stuff, I started to notice things in the game room when the door was open. The small hallway upstairs was perpendicular to the game room, and if you wanted to go downstairs, you had to walk towards the room and take a right down the stairs. I started noticing things that were blacker than black, walking back and forth in the already dark room. At night in the shades, with the shades down, that room was extremely dark, and to see things moving back and forth was terrifying. It almost seemed like it were groups of entities walking back and forth. This was before I ever heard about shadow people. A couple of weeks later, my brother and I were watching TV late at night downstairs, and my brother had passed out. After about 20 minutes, I saw a movement in the darkness of the stairwell, which was right across from the living room where we were. I fixated on the movement and saw something in a light-colored robe slowly sliding down the stairs, as if it were floating, not walking. I saw a hand or something like it stretched out on the railing, which faced me. Initially it scared me, and then I thought it might be my mom because she wears a robe at night and also has medium-length dark hair. Unfortunately, that comfort didn't last but a second, and then whatever it was just faded into nothing at the bottom of the stairs. I was already shaking my brother by this point. He didn't really care what I told him I saw and didn't believe me, but it was comforting to have someone awake with me then. Things started getting weirder in the house. I noticed my cat always fixated on something in the upper corner of my room. I'd like something was floating around or talking to her. It freaked me out, and any time she would start doing it, I'd kick her off my bed. One night, my own mother woke me up at 2 a.m. You know what she asked me? I was 18 at the time. She asked in a very terrified demeanor. My mom doesn't lie, and when she's afraid, it's got to be truly terrifying. I need you to check under my bed. Of course, unlike any other brave, accountable son, I said, yeah, no. She wouldn't tell me why initially, but pressing her on the whole deal, she eventually told me she woke up because she heard screaming. There was no dream because she had said she continued to hear it after she woke up, but it wasn't coming from outside or downstairs. She said she heard it underneath her bedboard, almost as if it was someone screaming like they were being dragged to hell. Those were her words. We both checked and didn't see anything of note, and I can't remember if she went downstairs or not for the rest of the night. Often at night, I would be up and usually make myself dinner late. Almost every night for a few months, I would get a really anxious feeling being in the kitchen. What it felt like was as if someone strong, angry, big, and terrifying was yelling at you at the top of their lungs, saying, "Get the F out of there." Like you were definitely hated and did not belong there. It was awful when it would happen. Perfectly normal kitchen 1 second, and boom, hateful, sinister environment the next. One time I saw what looked like a young kid walk across the kitchen archway. That was unsettling. More weird things started happening, and these were very frequent. Loud freaking bangs, crashing, and chaos. We had a few cats in the house, so anytime one of those crashes happened, they'd run up or downstairs depending where the noise originated. 2 times that stick out were once I was downstairs watching TV and my mom was upstairs. All of a sudden I heard the loudest crash I've ever heard in a house coming from the garage. It sounded like all the shelving on the wall fell over and crashed on top of glass and metal. The sound shook the house. This was no earthquake. I've had it happen before, and this wasn't a bang. This sounded like everything was falling off the walls. I quickly ran to the garage door, fully expecting to see carnage, but not a single thing was touched or had fallen. I inspected and searched around. My mom and I were pretty freaked out. Another time, I was again downstairs and heard upstairs what sounded like everything in my bathroom being thrown to the floor and all the soap crashing into the tub, followed by the cats running down the stairs. Again, I ran upstairs thinking the cats knocked all my stuff over, but there wasn't a single thing out of place. A few years after I moved out, my mom and I decided to do some EVP. My mom actually asked the questions. She asked if it was a boy or girl. Clearly I recorded something saying boy. If anyone wants the recording, I can provide it. I still have it from 2008. To be honest, I can't remember all the questions, but we got another response in a male voice. Of note, it was just my mom and I. If I spoke, it was obvious. There was no other people. I let the device record in the room after we left, and you can hear tons of noises, like someone is moving around in the room. After I moved out of the house into my first apartment, I felt like whatever was at that house actually attached itself to me. I still feel that way to this day. I constantly have cold winds in my house around me at night when there isn't a window open, or I'll hear voices of people that aren't in the house calling me. I hate it. Anyway, back to the first apartment. The first and only experience I had there was the first couple days my roommate and I moved in. There was a duck game going, and I was getting on my laptop to find out what the score was. This was 2007. Smartphones weren't as common as they are nowadays. Plus, internet was terrible on them. And I heard the nastiest, most guttural growl come from my room while I was sitting in the living room. We didn't have cable yet and didn't have any TV or music on. It literally sounded like one of those demon dog things from Ghostbusters. It scared the crap out of me. I remember the sound to this day. Don't know why it happened, but it never happened again. A few years go by, and most activity me and my roommate have is him saying he sometimes hears someone walking around in my room or in our kitchen and he thinks it's me, but I was never home and when he heard these things. Actually, this kind of stuff happens a lot even now. My wife says she heard me walking upstairs and fiddling around in my record room, but I'm either not home or asleep downstairs. Just creepy stuff. I eventually had to move back to my mom's place after my roommate decided to move home to save money. My mom later moved out and my girlfriend, who is now my wife, moved in. She isn't one to admit seeing things, but one time she saw something in our bathroom mirror while she was doing her hair, and she refuses to tell me, even to this day, exactly what it was. She'll never admit when she's scared, even horror movies. She'll get up and go to bed acting like the movie is dumb when it's actually scaring her. So one day, maybe she will feel up to it. She was vulnerable and scared when she told me about it, but quickly zipped her lips and now denies after saying anything about it. Anytime wasn't living there, nothing would happen. Nowadays, nothing happens anymore, but I feel like whatever it was is still with me now, popping up briefly here and there. I actually had a spiritualist tell me that something was partially possessing my life, or something negative was attached to me that wasn't a part of me. I went through prayer with a few spiritualist healers once when I was 21. It was pretty weird at first, but I felt it. Felt like something left me for a while, and my life felt more positive. Eventually, whatever it was has slowly infiltrated me again. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. I would like to take a moment to point out that a majority of my viewers are not subscribed. If you could be so kind as to subscribe, click like, leave a comment, maybe even share the video, it will go a long way in helping me get recommended. And if you would like to join my Patreon, you'll find a link in the description below. For $5 a month, you'll have access to all my content before it goes to YouTube. That goes for stories and my newest edition, short episodes of my mini haunting series. Now, let's get back to the stories. Story 1. When I was about 10 years old, my mother and next door neighbor named Margaret Lowry in Palo Alto, alleged to be a medium, were on the Ouija together one night. We'd often go over to our neighbor Margaret's house to do this, and my older brother would also attend, and several of his friends as well. Most evenings we'd have a regular spirit contact that the participants would reach named Kim, who had all sorts of interesting things to say. On this particular evening, a different contact came through. Instead of our usual contact Kim, this one spelled out the name John. Nothing else, just John. After a pause, a remaining message came through and was, in retrospect, rather chilling, for that at the time we didn't know what John meant when he said these two words, "Warn Bobby." We didn't know anyone in our immediate family named Bobby, so we were rather puzzled by this contact and what it had to convey to us all. It would become very clear that this Bobby that John was referring to was not a personal contact for us at all, but one personal to himself, and was also well known to the entire United States, if not the entire world. For about a week later, we learned that a man had assassinated Bobby Kennedy. We were stunned, however, not immediately. At the time of the contact from John, for at the time it had no particular meaning for us attending that session, but when the news came out of Robert Kennedy's assassination, we were left with a sinking feeling. How could we have told anyone to warn Bobby, even if we had known who Bobby was at the time? With so many Bobbies and Johns in the world, were we contacted by John F. Kennedy warning us of his younger brother's assassination? We will never know for certain, but we'll always wonder. Story 2. My name is Randall. It was the spring of early summer in 1973. I was 15 years old at the time, living in the coastal town of Pacifica in Central California, with my 3 siblings, my father, and his new Hawaiian girlfriend that also had several children. The 3 youngest lived with us. I had just gotten home from school and was anxious to sit down and read a book that I'd gotten from school library. Not that I'm a big reader, it was just one of the very few books that actually ever caught my attention. Since no one else was home at the time, I sat down at the kitchen table and started reading. I quickly got so into the storyline of the book that I was soon visualizing the scenes and characters, and seemed to even become consciously unaware of the words on the pages. Then, without warning, a young Indian woman stepped into the doorway of the kitchen, in my peripheral vision. She was dressed in an all-leather buckskin outfit with leather tassels. I could clearly see her long braided dark hair, which had thin strips of leather tied at the ends of the braids. I could also see she was wearing some turquoise jewelry. The event didn't startle me or scare me, though it was something that I never expected to actually happen. You see, up to that point in time, I'd had several very brief encounters, so brief and elusive that I questioned that maybe my mind may have actually just been playing tricks on me. Also, When we first moved into the town of Pacifica, some of our neighbors told us that our neighborhood had been built over an Indian burial ground. The neighbor woman from across the street even stated that she'd walked into the bedroom to check on her infant and saw an Indian woman standing at the crib looking at her child. At the time, I totally thought those stories had most likely been provoked by people's fears about the burial ground. Yet here I was having similar events at a moment when I hadn't even given the subject a single thought and was preoccupied with a book that I'd been reading. I hesitated to look right away because I'd learned from previous events that when you just look, nothing is ever there. It's as if engaging your physical senses blocks the receptibility of your soul, which is what I think is seeing the image and not your eyes. Anyhow, even when you don't look quickly and try not to activate your physical senses and brain, the event is still quite brief and elusive. I couldn't help but ponder the whole event and its detail, questioning why it ever happened, and especially to me. I questioned that if it was a ghost or someone that has passed, then why could I see its body? And more than that, why was I able to see her clothes and jewelry, since they're inanimate objects? With that, I drew what I considered to be a more rational conclusion, that most likely there was a spirit there with me, simply trying to get my attention and wanted to gauge my reaction and receptibility. I believed it chose the image of a person, knowing that I was there alone, thus knowing it would be a bit more alerting to my consciousness, and chose an Indian woman to get me to think ghost, thus also knowing that I'd then think spirit, especially after seeing the inanimate object. About a week later, I had a test to do at school, one that I was very concerned about doing well on. The day of the test, I arrived on the school grounds just a few minutes late. I was walking briskly with books under one arm when the bell rang for everyone to go inside. My classroom was the one at the far left end of the building. As I was walking fast in that direction, a ball came rolling out towards me, as if someone had kicked it. I didn't want to take the time to get it, but just knew that one of the yard duty teachers was most likely going to ask me to get it. Knowing that, I wanted every minute possible to do my test. I avoided looking or going towards that ball, but to my surprise, the darn ball kept rolling at an angle towards me and ended up rolling right up to me, to the point that I shifted my books from my right arm to my left, bent over and started to put my hands around it to pick it up. As I then put my eyes directly on it, it vanished. I quickly stood up, looked around to see if anyone had just witnessed that embarrassing event. I then walked to the class to do my test. I quickly realized that the spirit that I'd pondered just a few days earlier might have the ability to project images of people and inanimate objects at me. Just proved it boldly by projecting that ball, and it was so real that I tried to pick it up. That told me that both events were in fact very real, and that spirit was in fact reaching out to me for some unknown reason, a reason that I'd learned about much more years later. Story 3. I travel once in a while for my job. I had flown to California and was back at a hotel after work. At about 3 a.m. I woke up to the Grim Reaper standing at the foot of my bed. He was very tall, in a hooded black as night cloak. I could kind of see some shape of a skull underneath the hood. He walked towards me, stopped right about at my waist, then bent over and smelled my body as if I was a roast. I could feel how pleased my scent made him, as if he had been waiting for a long time to get his hands on me. That was when I started screaming, but it only came out in desperate, muffled sobs. He continued to take big, deep breaths in while moving up and down my body from my waist to my head, each time raising up after and exhaling out in pleasure. It was horrible. I continued screaming until he just vanished. I felt as if I was close enough to death that night, and he was there to collect my soul. I had taken a prescription benzo that night along with the alcohol to fall asleep. I think I almost died from that combo. I was not asleep while that happened. The minute he vanished, there was no transition time from being asleep to waking up. I was definitely awake the whole time. He was not there to pleasantly transition me to the other side either. I felt as if he was the hunter and I was the prey. Yes, I've heard of sleep paralysis, but this was not it. He was hungry for a soul. It seemed like some are more delicious to him than others. It sounds silly now, but at the time it was horrible. Why would he smell me up and down like that, drawing in my essence? Gives me chills to this day. Story 4. My sister and I went to walk our little dog around the block. There are 6 houses on our side of the street, ours being the second one from the corner of Maclay and Gladstone. We exited our home, and as we walked up the driveway, there was an incline out our front door to the sidewalk. I turned to my right and saw clear across the front yards of the 3 closest neighbors, clear to the last house on the corner. I could see that somebody was watering the front yard of the house on the corner of Gladstone and McNeil. I could see that it was a woman watering her yard. She was wearing what appeared to be a robe. It was an older woman. She had completely gray hair, a little on the poopy side, I could see through it. Anyway, I could see her holding the water hose, and I could see the stream of water coming from it out to the sidewalk. I told my sister, the sidewalk is going to be wet. My sister later told me she thought questioningly, wet? There are approximately 60 to 70 steps to the corner house, not much, and as we approached that very area, nothing. No wet sidewalk, no water hose, nobody watering the lawn. I was dumbfounded. I told my sister, hey, I just saw somebody watering this front lawn. That's why I told you the sidewalk would be wet. My sister didn't see anything and most certainly didn't believe me. She had just wondered why I had said that the sidewalk would be wet. I never saw it again. I've seen the woman who lived in that house, still does to my best of my knowledge. I've seen her several times, in fact, wearing a house coat or a robe. I know I had seen what I seen, and yet, what was that about? Story 5. My husband and I moved every 4 years with our children due to military duties. The last 3 assignments were Los Angeles to Cape Canaveral, Florida, then back to LA. We found a newly built 2-story back unit, suitable for us, and quickly moved in. About a month and a half there, at 7 months pregnant with our only girl, I took my usual trip to the bathroom at around 1 a.m. As I returned to bed, something grabbed my foot and I fell to the ground. Luckily, I was able to lean towards the bed and bent my left knee to prevent falling flat on my belly. I was more concerned with the baby that I didn't investigate what was there. I convinced my husband not to take me to the emergency room, so I quietly cried myself to sleep while monitoring the baby's movements. Apparently, I broke my back and needed surgeries to correct the injury, but only after the baby's delivery. During the span of 4 years, we had encountered a few paranormal activities at home. I heard little feet running from the hallway to the bedroom, and whatever that was shook my bed as if it jumped onto the bed. I was expecting our 5-year-old son coming home from school, but it was only 9 a.m. I was alone recuperating from surgery. It happened to my husband, but we never shared our experiences until one night. I came home late with my visiting mother. I entered our room, but went straight to the bathroom for about 20 minutes. I heard a squealing sound coming from my room, but very low. I stood near the door to hear it again. It didn't sound like my husband. As I came in, he whispered and asked to turn the light on. He was frozen in fear. He asked me to look at his chest area to see if there was anything, like an indentation. He claimed that he had heard me come in the room, then suddenly his body started to sink in the bed. A dark mist appeared in front of him and he couldn't scream. He tried, hence the sound I heard, so we started talking about the unusual things. Our daughter was old enough to hold a phone and take pictures. She took 3 consecutive photos, and the one in the middle captured thick smoke over my husband's image, as if there was a cigar lit next to the phone. My sister and niece came to visit from Belgium. We set her up in one of the boys' room. Due to the time difference, she couldn't sleep. At around 3 a.m., she noticed a foot-tall black mask come out of the closet in front of the bed and floated towards the open door. This entity passed the nightlight installed in the hallway outside the bedroom. She watched this thing move with a purpose. She was terrified and refused to sleep there ever again. We eventually moved after retiring. Still in LA, my husband told me that this thing followed us. Story 6. I got a call from my dad telling me my grandfather was in the hospital up north and was not doing well. They were going to cut off his leg to try to save him, but it did not look hopeful. They didn't want me to come see him, and I couldn't talk to him, so I sadly expected a call soon informing me that it was over. I got a call, but it was my grandfather. He sounded chipper and upbeat, and I got to tell him what my expected son was going to be named, the same as him, my father, and me. He said, "Well, that's a good name," and then he wanted directions to my house. I'm just realizing as I'm writing this that as I was giving him the directions, I was visualizing the trip from above as if I was flying over. I remember asking if he was going to visit, and he said if he got the chance he would come by. After the call, I felt relieved that he was doing better and was even making plans to travel. Then I got the call from my dad telling me my grandfather had passed. I told him we had just talked and that he had sounded so much better, but he said that happens sometimes right before someone passes. I was very sad, but found some comfort in the fact that I was able to tell him about naming my expected son. At the wake, I was speaking about the day he passed and how he had called me that afternoon and sounded so much better, but someone pulled me aside and told me to stop talking about it and that my grandfather had actually passed in the morning. He loved to break the rules. I sure miss him. Story 7. It all started when I was 11 years old. Me and my family were in the front yard. No one was in the house. We were playing basketball and I suddenly stared at my sister's window and I suddenly saw a fist from inside the house behind my sister's window smash her window. Then suddenly everyone stopped playing basketball and went to take a look at the broken window. I was shocked and speechless. My dad said it was a bird, but there was no bird. I knew what I saw. It was a pale hand that made a fist. I told my dad and he checked the house, but no one was inside. Then, when I was 12, I saw shadow people late at night in the hallway go to my sister's room, and I was very scared, so scared I couldn't walk to the hallway to access my room, so instead I ran out of the house during the night to go across the street to my friend's house. Then years later, when I was 19, I was sitting in my friend's car and heard what appeared to be a big dog run around the car. It was parked in an underground parking lot, so I didn't know how any dogs would be in there. Then when I was 21, I had the experience of putting my MP3 player in my locker at the gym, and when I came back it was gone. I drove home and opened up the bathroom door, and there it was. It was on the sink. Did it teleport? What was this, and why? I still think about this incident until this day. Do demonic forces have the ability to misplace items? Does anyone else think these experiences were demonic? Story 8. Years ago, driving back from Sacramento to Monterey, I went over Pacheco Pass, and I saw a small car broken down on the side as I was coming down the hill. There were kids in the back seat playing under a sheet, and there was a lady on the passenger side with the door open. I felt bad for not stopping and was giving myself a hard time, telling myself if I saw anyone else, fat chance, that I would have to stop when I suddenly saw a priest walking down the right side of the road. He was wearing a black robe, and it reminded me of that character from Saturday Night Live back in the 80s, Father Guido Sarducci. I figured, since it was a priest, there was no question that I had to pull over and help. When I pulled up, he looked old with his face all wrinkly and burnt, like I remember the old homeless guys living under Monterey Wharf looked. His clothes, or robe, looked tattered like he had gone through some serious roughness, and he looked very mad. When I asked him if he needed help, he mumbled something, but I couldn't understand. I told him they might hassle him for walking along the road, and then he turned to look right at me and spoke clearly. "So you're trying to help me?" I told him I had thought he might need a ride, and he asked me if I'd seen a woman walking, but I told him no. I thought this was strange since it was an odd place to take a walk, but I wished him luck and started on the road again. I looked back in the rear view and didn't see him. I remember thinking that was a little strange because there was nowhere to hide, but I just kind of ignored it until years later when a friend posted an article about ghosts in Central California, and it described the ghost in black robe up on Pacheco Pass, and it hit me. After a bunch of research, I found a forum where people were talking about experiences they had, and several of them described a small car on the side of the road with boys playing in the back seat under a sheet and a lady getting something out of the passenger side. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. One time when I was like 10, I was trying to go to sleep. I had just come home from an Iron Maiden concert. It was like 12:30 at night. I'm trying to sleep and I'm counting the time to pass it. So then it's like 1:33 before I know it, and I hear this music playing. It was LaGrange by ZZ Top, playing on my MP3 player. It was faint, but I look at it and say to myself, I turned this off yesterday morning, but I decided it was nothing, so I try to go back to sleep. But at about 2:15, I hear a drumming noise. Then I heard this cranking noise coming from my brother's room. He was 13 at the time. So then I hear this strange combination of sounds. It sounded like a mix of everything I had just heard, but with a scream, a screeching of metal, a groan, and a growl. So this scared the absolute crap out of me. It was like 3:10, and I had to go to the bathroom. I'd been holding it since the beginning of the concert at around 8. I don't want to go, because wetting the bed sounds like a better option than possibly dying from whatever this noise was. And it was about 4 when I finally did go. So our bathroom is kind of spooky, and I opened the door. Then I was in the bathroom completely, no turning back now. I look in every corner, but there was nothing there. So the bathroom was kind of weird. It was a 2-room bathroom, one section with a sink, and the next room with a toilet and a shower and a bathtub. And I used the bathroom, and I saw a big pair of blood red eyes and the outline of a dark figure in the one place I didn't check, the shower. And this was especially creepy because the concert I went to, Iron Maiden, yeah, because they sing about Satan and death and creepy stuff like that. But naturally I ran to my parents' room, and they checked it out, but nothing was there. Instead it was total bullcrap. But I know what I saw. It was really traumatizing because, well, I was only 10 years old. Anyways, if anyone knows what could have done this, let me know. It could have been my mind playing tricks on me, but I don't think it was. Story 2. 2 weeks ago, me and my sister were exploring the woods behind our new house. It was pretty boring, but breathtaking in a way. There was a little creek that ran from the front of the woods to the rest of the houses and beautiful willow trees. Me and my sister dipped our feet into the cold water and had lots of fun. But this is only the start of when things got weird. It was 7 p.m. and getting dark, so my sister decided we should head back for the house. I agreed, so we started walking back. I'm not sure why, but I felt like we were being watched. I looked behind me, and far in the distance I could make out the shape of a human, but like a shadow figure. I couldn't tell if it was walking to us, so I asked my sister to stop for a second. I explained to her that I think we're being watched. She, quite startled by this, asked me why I think so. I pointed out in the distance where the figure was still standing. Alexa, my sister, told me we need to get to the house and she'll explain it. I didn't know why we were in such a hurry, but I ran with her to the safety of our house. We locked the back door and sat in the living room. A minute later, of hard breathing, Alexa explained that the thing we saw was a ghost that we possibly led to our house. I shrugged my shoulders. Honestly, I didn't care all that much. Just a spirit wandering around our house. I didn't mind. I'd like to say my sister was right. The next day was very weird. My family woke up at around 6 a.m. hearing a woman scream help, although no one was there that we knew of. Basically, we all experienced something that day. Our mom was cooking breakfast and went to the restroom when she heard a loud bang and came back to see pots and pans all over the floor. Our dad was listening to his radio while drinking coffee, and the radio oddly kept changing channels, although no one was touching it. My younger sister Sophia was watching TV, and the TV kept changing channels, oddly enough, but she claimed to not have done anything. And then when my older twin sister Alexa went outside, she said that there was a floaty in the pool moving by itself. I was alone in the dining room, the lights flickered, but no one was around. So I hope you enjoyed this weird story. If you have any questions, don't mind asking me. Story 3. So basically back when I was around 8, I had lots of paranormal experiences at my elementary school, which started my fascination with paranormal activity. I forgot the name of the school because that was back when I was living in Ohio, and I have moved to Virginia about 3 weeks ago. So technically these are things I've noticed at my school that I kept a notebook of. On October 5th, 2017, I was going to the restroom. There was multiple girl bathrooms in the school, but I went to the one I found the creepiest. It was the creepiest because that's where most of the experiences happened. So I went into the stall, and after a minute or two I heard footsteps. I thought that it was just someone else, till I realized if it was someone else, you would have heard the door swing open and noise from the halls and classrooms, although I never did. When I got out of the stall, I turned to the door and realized it was open. When I mean open, it was just standing open, not moving anywhere. The door I'm talking about are the ones that don't stay open. They'll just close and you'd have to hold it open to stay open. But no one was there, although yet again I thought someone was holding it from the outside of the bathroom, and I just couldn't see them behind the door. So for this very reason I said hello, but no one answered and the door closed. I ran over to the door as quick as I could and pushed it open. No one was there. There's no possible way to hide in a second. I don't know what I experienced, but I know it wasn't normal. On December 13th, 2017, it was after school. I was doing a play tryout for my school. It was around 5 p.m., so things got dark real fast. Me and my friends were talking and practicing lines when we both noticed a child's laughter. Possibly belonged to a little girl around 5 years maybe. We looked over at everyone else, who looked confused. We heard the child laugh again. Now we knew it wasn't anyone there. I heard a few sixth graders talking quietly to one another and pointing to the stage. I noticed the curtains on the stage oddly moving. Some sixth graders went over to the stage. I followed because I wanted in on the action. Someone moved the curtain a little to see if it was someone playing a trick on us. The child's laughter started again, and I could almost see an outline of the little girl. We walked away from the stage quite confused at what we saw. On March 3rd, 2017, I was alone walking in the office with a note from my teacher that she asked me to give to the office. This will be short and weird, but for reasons I'll explain that in this school, we have a basement that is right across from the office. Now basically, as I was walking to the office, I noticed the scream of a woman coming from the basement. The scream was dreadful, and when I went to sleep that night, I heard a woman scream from outside my window too. Story 4. I've had many unexplainable phenomena happen to and around me over the years. This particular extraordinary event occurred in November of 2007 in Norfolk, Virginia. My husband and I were living in a small 1950s home that we were in the process of renovating until the day we sold it, and I was around 4 months pregnant with our son. The backstory on our house is that it was owned by the Grays prior to my husband buying it in 1999. We do not know exact dates, but we know that Mr. Gray passed first and that Mrs. Gray took her final breaths in the house in 1998. There was not much notable activity, but occasionally you could feel a feminine presence. It was disapproving sometimes and would hover watching us when we got up to the early 20s antics of partying. On one occasion, the dog door flap swung back and forth for half an hour. Our dog Shadow was in the room with me, and there was no wind strong enough to move our dog door flap big enough for a Rottweiler. It freaked me out, but Shadow was calm, and she was a coward, so I told myself it was fine. I owned a small business at the time, and we were gearing up for the holiday season. My mother-in-law had unexpectedly passed a month prior, and my husband was still numb. I was trying to carry the bills, a child, and a grieving husband through the retail rush. He was working construction and left earlier in the morning than I did most days. In a hurry to get out of the house and open my store, I locked my keys in the house. My husband was at work already, and I needed to open my store on time or the mall would charge a fine. I was an emotional wreck with trying to work through the combination of loss and pregnancy, so there I was standing next to my car, looking up at the sky, about to break down sobbing. It was all wrong. I shouldn't be shoving down my excitement about my pregnancy because my husband needed me. His mom shouldn't be dead. It shouldn't be on the brink of Black Friday. I wanted a break. I just needed to be in the house and get my keys. The back door was probably unlocked, but jumping a 6-foot fence while pregnant was a last case scenario. I started to walk back up the path to the front steps and stopped, choking back a sob and blinking to fight my tears. I looked down and there was a key at my feet, a house key, not on a keychain,
We didn't have any extra keys. I can't tell you if it was left there by Mrs. Gray or by Brian's mom, but it was everything I needed right then. I picked it up and it was the key to my front door. The key felt like a literal symbol that there was hope and that I was not doing this alone. Story 5. A few weeks ago, I had gone to sleep with my LED light on a bright setting. My mom decided they were too bright and came in my room and changed them without waking me up. I usually sleep with my covers on top of me since I feel uneasy about my closet in my room. I opened my eyes to something laying on top of my stomach. Confused, I sat up, but nothing was there. Everything was the exact same except for my LED lights, which were dimmed. I checked the time and it was around 11:30 p.m. I went back to sleep in a daze. When I woke up the next morning, I asked my mom if she had come in my room. To my confusion, she said all she had done was change my light color. Since my dad wasn't awake yet, I waited downstairs. When he finally awoke, I asked him the same thing. He said that he hadn't even come near my room. After that, I was absolutely confused. My parents just laughed my panic off and still do whenever I bring it up. I get a feeling of being watched from my closet whenever I have the cover over my head. When I sit up, I still feel a sense of being watched, but not as much as before. Whenever I'm doing anything in my room, I have a feeling to look over my shoulder at my closet. The more I think about it, I think I might be overthinking, although I know what I'm feeling at night. Even now, my parents think I'm just playing around when I say that I feel uncomfortable in my own room, so I've come here for help. Would burning sage help, or is this bigger situation than just burn sage and you're good? Story 6. My husband Sean and I, as newlyweds, relocated to a little house in Weber City, Virginia, in January 2014. We were so excited to move into this house as we were leasing to own. My mom assisted us in the move, and we couldn't have been prouder of being homeowners. It was such a beautiful little starter home. It was located practically at the base of a mountain in the woods, located on the Trail of Tears. Within the first week, the activity began. I was training as a CNA at a local nursing home in the area, and I got up early one morning as I had been for my classes. It was around 5:30 in the morning, and I was in the bathroom blow drying my hair with the door open. It was a small bathroom, so I left the door open so I wouldn't get hot. As I held my head upside down and tossed my hair in the dryer around, I caught a glimpse of someone in an old-timey pioneer woman dress float directly next to me into my bedroom. Confused and not understanding what I had just seen, I stopped what I was doing and walked into the bedroom where my husband was sleeping. I couldn't explain what had just happened. I was at a total loss for words. I mentioned what had happened to friends and family, and most just laughed. When I told my mother, she mentioned to me that the house next door had been on a paranormal television show, and supposedly it was known for being extremely haunted. I laughed it off and didn't think much of it. I was wrong to ever act so nonchalant. We found out we were pregnant with our firstborn, Harper, shortly after moving into the home. Things were great for a while. We had a baby on the way. I had decided to take time and stay home while pregnant. One night I remember my husband had went to sleep before me. I was sitting in the living room watching TV, and we had 3 dogs at the time, and I whistled for them to come out of the bedroom and come into the living room with me. I whistled, and all of a sudden I heard a whistle right back. I got up and walked to the bedroom to see if my husband was awake, and he was fast asleep. I got that eerie feeling like someone was watching me and stayed up most of the night. There were many moments in the home where you would hear people speaking in the house very low. I can only explain it like a diner and how it can be during an early morning rush. Multiple conversations just going nonstop. We could hear it all throughout the night while we laid in the bed and attempted to sleep. My husband was a bit of a skeptic prior to living in this house. You could also lay in our bed at night and see shadows speed from the dining room to the living room. It got to be quite disturbing at night when we laid down and we both just thought our eyes were playing tricks on us. The activity was fairly frequent, but nothing too extreme at first. Now I know seeing someone walk by me is pretty extreme, but not when you lived in this house. Eventually, we got pregnant again with Charlotte and became a family of 4. My husband's cousins, Thomas, needed a place to stay and moved in with us. We joked with him about the house next door being haunted and told him about the weird things that occurred in our home. My husband, being the practical joker he is, thought it'd be funny to buy a satanic Bible and read and poke fun at the things in it. He liked to taunt people or things on occasion. One night he decided he'd go next door and summon whatever was in that house to come to him. No one was living in the home at the time. Usually the residents didn't last longer than a few months. As soon as he got done summoning whatever it was in that house, he became violently ill and ran back home, getting sick in the yard. After that, things went downhill. There were times when you can go outside and see the light randomly come on upstairs in the house next door, and no one was there. We know this because my husband and his friends went over to find out if someone was there. They knocked for a while and no one came to the door. They came back to the porch and the light went off. It was strange. We went back in our house and came back out to smoke about 30 minutes later, and the light came back on. We would see shadows all the time outside as well. So much just kept going on. After the Satanic Bible incident, my husband, myself, and the girls were asleep in the bed. I remember waking up feeling someone's hands touching me inappropriately, and I thought it was my husband. I remember laughing and saying stop. When I opened my eyes, I was looking at him with both of the girls laying on and against him. I immediately froze in fear and went catatonic. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't do anything. I remember feeling the tears running down my face, and with everything in me, I knew someone was behind me. It's like I was screaming in my head for my husband to wake up, but nothing came out. Finally, it's like whatever was touching me released me, and I shot up crying. I was so shook by that moment. I had never had anything like that happen to me. I felt so violated. My husband, being my husband, just laughed and assumed I had been dreaming and poked fun at me about it. I labeled the next incident as the big night because it was just that. One night my husband, his cousin, and myself were hanging out. The girls were already in bed. We were up late and it was so cold outside. I remember having to wear a jacket when I went outside and smoked, and I could see my breath, it was that cold. I came back in from the back porch after smoking and looked out my dining room window toward the haunted house. In the yard, they had a concrete table and a bench, and to my surprise, in the freezing cold, there were 3 people sitting at the table, and a lantern was lit over their head. A tall man, and his face was so distorted I couldn't make it out. He was wearing overalls and kept shaking oddly. A dark blonde woman and an old woman in a long black robe or a dress. Now I wouldn't have thought it too strange, but the lantern was just hanging in midair from nothing, and it was freezing cold outside, and they were just sitting there. I shouted for my husband and his cousin, another skeptic, and they both were shocked and in disbelief. We couldn't believe our eyes. I ran to the back porch and looked at the table, and no one was there. I thought I was going crazy. I ran back in, and there they were again. I went to my front porch, and I could still see them. Again, back to the porch, and they were gone. It's like the only place I could see them was from my dining room and front porch. My husband's cousin, Thomas, was in shock and refused to look anymore, and went back into the living room scared of what he was seeing. I remember asking him, "Are you seeing this, the same thing I'm seeing?" He replied, "Yes, but I don't want to admit it to myself." I waved at the people sitting there, and they waved back. I did this frequently throughout the night, until finally around 4 a.m., the blonde female flipped me off. At around 6, they disappeared. It was the craziest thing I had ever seen, and I've never seen anything like it since. One day, the woman that owned the house next door came over and asked my husband if he could help change the locks on her house, because new people were moving in. He went over and helped, and she proceeded to tell him her brother had lived in the house and practiced the occult and was into some pretty heavy stuff. He had Parkinson's and always wore overalls. He immediately thought of the man we'd seen that night sitting at the table outside. She then told him her brother shot himself upstairs in the middle of a pentagram. My husband was very disturbed by this. We both swear it was her brother we saw that night at the table outside. We lived there for a few years, and it was almost like the place was draining our relationship, turning us against one another, and causing severe damage to our marriage. We decided to part ways, and I relocated to North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, to be closer to my mother, who had moved down a year after I moved into that house. Leaving that house was the best decision we ever made. My husband and I reconciled and are happier than ever here in South Carolina with both of our girls. One evening we were watching TV, and this show pops up on Hulu called Paranormal State. An episode labeled The Devil's Nest comes on. That's episode 20, season 3. We began watching, and we were shocked by what we were seeing. As they drove up our old road, our old hill, you could see our house as they pulled into the driveway of the house next door and began their investigation of the Devil's Nest. My husband was in shock and stated that this just put everything together he'd experienced, because he wrote it off as he was just going crazy. One scene in the show, the resident states she was assaulted in her sleep by something there that made things just come together for me. My husband was at that point in shock and dismay by what had actually happened to me. We both feel for whoever lives in either house, because we don't feel like it's the houses. We feel like it's the land, and it is a permanent stain that will never be lifted. I'm so glad we moved away from there, but we will always remember the horrible and shocking events that happened while living there. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. I'm 11 years old, and I've already witnessed 3 events involving ghosts in my house. It was about 2 weeks from Christmas. It was really late at night because I couldn't go to sleep. I looked up out my window and saw something. It was an orange mist with eyes. I was scared to death, but didn't make a sound. It was creepy because it stared at me. I just got as low as I could, hoping it would go away. It did, but then something worse happened. I blinked, and in its place was another ghost. Don't say this is a figment of my imagination, because I pinched and punched myself to make sure I was awake. The ghost was a person. He seemed old-fashioned, about early 1900s, I'd say. All of him either had a pale tint, or his clothes were pale, and so was his skin. He was carrying something. I think it was a gun or an axe. It was just staring across the room. It was the last thing I saw before I went to sleep. 2 years later, 2007, late January, I woke up and saw something else. Something in a dark red robe was walking toward the foot of my bed, toward a table. It put its hand on the table like it picked something up or put something down, and then vanished. I again made sure I was awake. Story 2. One night, my uncle took me, my sister, my brother, my cousin, and my other uncle to an old church graveyard on a long, skinny dirt road way back in the woods. There, I witnessed things that I will never forget. I was only 6 or 7, and it was a full moon. I could see everything real good on the dirt road. We arrived at the old church and graveyard between 12 and 1 a.m. My uncle told us the story that if you touched all 4 corners of Grady Harrison's grave, he would come out and give you his fiddle. My sister and cousin were a lot older than me and a lot braver. They decided to get out of the van and touch the 4 corners of his grave. Right when they got to the grave, the clouds covered the moon just like in the movies, and we heard something calling all of our names. We started to see orbs pop up and moving in the woods in all kinds of directions. We called for the girls to come back to the van, but they didn't hear us. When I looked up, I saw Grady Harrison right by them. It was like a white shadow or fog, but real detailed. He was playing his fiddle and dancing a jig. Finally, they saw the ghost and ran back to the van. But this story isn't over yet. The van wouldn't start. Not only that, but at the old church, there was an old walking cane hanging out the window at least 5 feet and turning all different ways. And the orbs started getting closer and making strange noises. Finally, the van started. It was a brand new van. We are heading out of the graveyard. All the kids are in the back of the van making crosses with their pens. We looked out the window and there's a demon. Yes, I said a demon. It had 4 legs, a black body, a black and red face with a fire mane, kind of like a lion's mane, and fire eyes. It was running right beside the van. I looked right at it and felt that literally made me sick. Once we made it to the paved road, it was gone. I've seen ghosts before. We visited all 13 Alabama ghosts, but I never went looking for them after that. I believe in God, but after witnessing what I did on that night, I also believe in the devil and all the bad things he produces. So if you are ever around Opp, Alabama, just on the other side of Kinston, if you want to believe yourself, just go visit Harrison's graveyard on a full moon night, but don't say I didn't warn you. Story 3. My father's family cemetery is located at the foot of 2 mountains in a hollow. The cemetery is divided into 4 family groups. One enclosed cemetery has a tombstone that vibrates when you touch it. My father told me this story, and one day I had him take me to it. I put a bottle of water on the stone and nothing happened. I touched it and it began to vibrate. I put the bottle of water back on it and it didn't move. I leaned up against it with the bottle of water and it vibrated. When I stepped away, it stopped. No one knows why the tombstone vibrates. Later that year, I was at the cemetery with my daughter doing some research, and she saw something moving around in the enclosed cemetery. Since this is a private cemetery, I walked up there, and in the cemetery we see a lady in a long gown. She wasn't walking, sort of floating. We couldn't see her feet. We both stood there and watched her float towards the vibrating stone. She disappeared. When we walked up to the grave, you could see footprints in the dirt, and the stone was vibrating. I told my father about it, and he said that the woman buried there died before her husband, and her husband had erected the stone with his name on it. Later, he remarried. When he died, his second wife had him buried in her family's plot. What me and my daughter saw was her searching for her lost husband. Story 4. When I was smaller, the attic to my house was used for storage and nothing special really. I never went up there. There was no AC or heater. But in the summer of 2005, my attic was redone, and now it's a playroom for my sister and I. There are 2 TVs up there, a couch, and 1 window. There are also 2 closet doors for storage. They stay cold, dark, and dank all year round. It all started in the attic when I turned off my video game, and the TV started thumping from the inside, sounding like a heartbeat. This still goes on, mind you, and I just blew this off and thought nothing of it. The only thing that happened next that really awakened me was my friend Kim and I were in one of the closets. We just opened the door and turned on the light. Soon after, we were standing on opposite sides of the closet space. We were standing still, and a picture slid off the box it was sitting on and onto the floor with a loud thump. There were no drafts, no way Kim or me could have made that box or picture fall. Soon after this, nothing went on for a while. But one night, as I was sitting up on my couch in the living room, I heard what sounded like footsteps running along my furnace in the hallway. I got up, went to walk down the hallway, only to find nothing wrong. I turned around and headed for the living room again. However, when I was completely turned around, the attic door slammed shut. The window was not open because I rushed up there to check. I saw nothing. There have been no other particular things going on besides this. This house is only 15 years old, built by my stepfather himself. The only other weird encounter I recall is being 3 years old in my parents' bed, seeing some kind of freaky animal crawling in my hallway, heading towards me. My parents say I was scared that night, and that they had to turn on the lights 3 times before I would fall asleep. Story 5. My best friend, I'll call her Anna, and I met when we were both in the same 4th grade class at a local private Catholic school. When we were in the 5th grade, Anna, who was an only child and lived with her mother, moved out of her condo and into a newer condo complex. The condo was built like a townhouse,
with 3 bedrooms and 2.5 baths on 2 levels. It had probably been built sometime in the 1970s. The condo itself was nice enough, amenities wise, but the first time I ever went into the house, I immediately noticed how completely awful it felt inside. Later, my mother, who still does not fully believe what happened there, would admit that she also found the house creepy. It seemed to be unnaturally dark in there, and it just had this miserable feeling that even permeated the front and back porch. The feeling was not depressing as much as it was ugly. That is the best word I can use to describe the way this condo felt. Things began to happen immediately. All of Anna's cats turned up missing. I believe there were 3 in all. One had been hit by a car in front of the condo. This is actually really weird because the front door faced a parking lot with speed bumps everywhere. I have a hard time imagining anyone managing to hit a cat in that place. Anna also had several pet cockatiels. At some point, they decided to give the birds to her grandmother because she and her mother were afraid the birds may die also. The birds were really loud, and after they had been removed from the house, you could still hear them chirping from the room that they had been in. I witnessed this myself and found it particularly creepy. I often spent the night with Anna on the weekends, and we all stayed in the same room together. Anna, her mom, and me. We would hear footsteps going up and down the stairs or banging noises in the attic. Anna and I took showers together in swimsuits because the almost nauseating feeling of being watched was worse than the shower. Frequently, we'd be awoken from our sleep to loud breathing and growling noises that seemed to be right by our ears. One evening, the 3 of us were in the living room watching the TV. We had left the light on in the upstairs bathroom, and Anna's mother asked us to run upstairs and turn it off. We always went everywhere in the house. In landing, her mother asked me a question. I turned to answer her as Anna continued up the second flight of stairs. Suddenly, Anna screamed and rushed past me, back down the stairs. I followed her down. She was crying, but as she explained, not from fear or any emotion, but from pain. Her eyes were red and bloodshot and full of tears. She said that she had looked up to the top of the stairs into the hall, and suddenly a huge and brilliant whoosh of light came at her and burned her eyes. I personally didn't see anything, and as a consequence didn't really believe her, but looking back it was pretty obvious that something had indeed happened to Anna. I went ahead upstairs to turn off the bathroom light, and Anna went to the couch. Her mom told me not to worry about it, but I felt exhilarated and a little nervous, and actually wanted to go and see if there was anything up there. I told her I would be quick. I darted down the hall to the bathroom, and as I passed the guest bedroom door, which was open, I peeked inside. I was facing a stand-up mirror, and inside the mirror I could see small bluish balls of light floating around in the reflection. Other things that happened included a cyclone of floating garbage from the can in the kitchen. Anna described seeing a ghastly face and a table fan in her bedroom. The fan had been on full speed and just stopped cold, and the face appeared. There was also foul smells that could seem to float around the house. Anna's mother was not wealthy, so they were not able to move immediately, though they did eventually leave as soon as her mother was able to find another place for them to live. In the meantime, her mother began to look for ways to deal with the phenomenon. Obviously, her first stop was the Catholic Church, where Anna and I attended grade school. Though our archdiocese has an exorcist priest, the church seemed reluctant to get involved. Anna did, however, start taking holy water home several times a week. Her mother was losing patience, though, and asked a Baptist minister to come take a look at the house. The man came, and while he was there, they heard what sounded like heavy footsteps crashing upstairs. Then it sounded like something crashed through the ceiling and hit the floor in the living room where they were sitting. The thing then ran across the room and threw itself through the living room picture window. They heard all of these sounds, including the glass breaking, but nothing physically had actually happened. The Baptist minister literally ran out of the house and left, never to be heard from again. Eventually, the exorcist priest did come to the house. While he was there, something grabbed Anna's leg and yanked her out of her chair and dragged her across the floor. The priest witnessed this. By this time, Anna's mother had learned a bit about the house. Apparently, an old woman had died after having been pushed by her own daughter down the stairs, and some of the neighbors had heard rumors that before the old woman had lived there, strange people had gatherings in the house in the middle of the night. None of this really explained what was going on in the condo, however. It wasn't some big climactic revelation like you see on TV when they discover an Indian burial ground or some such thing. The priest asked Anna's mother if she had done anything to the house when they had moved in, or if she had noticed anything odd about the house itself, besides the phenomena. Her mother recalled a small metal plaque that had been hung in the threshold of the front door. It had been in a language she was not familiar with. I had seen the plaque too when they had first moved in. It was about the size of a credit card, and the letters were in relief. Anna's mother produced the plaque, and the priest identified it as a Hebrew blessing. He spent some time in the house and eventually diagnosed the condo as being infested with something like 9 separate demons. He then replaced the plaque inside the door frame, and within a week, the condo was exorcised by the Catholic Church. I don't know what happened during this time. Only her mother was present when the exorcism took place. Anna stayed with her grandmother. The exorcism was successful for the most part. No more major incidents occurred in the house, though it still had that ugly aura about it. Also, the bad smells and unnatural shadows lingered on. They moved from the condo less than a year later. To this day, Anna doesn't like to talk about what happened when we were kids. I can't say I blame her either.
Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. I was around 12 years old or so, and I had spent the night at my mother's. I lived with my grandma, but I go to my mom's when it's the weekend, and everyone in the house was asleep. I was sleeping in the living room, and it was dark. Not that dark because of the light that was in the kitchen. And I woke up around 5 a.m. I heard a voice, and it told me to leave the house, and it sounded like it was right next to me. I was so scared that I stayed up until I fell asleep again, staring at the ceiling. Then I heard footsteps on the floor and looked and saw a shadow, and I thought that it was my stepdad going to the restroom. But instead of going to the restroom, it was going after me. I shouted my mother's name, and the shadow disappeared, and my mom came running into the living room. I told her about it, and she just said that we had to talk about it in the morning. We both went to sleep, and in the morning, my mother simply told me that the house was haunted. Story 2. I have lived in my current residence for a little over 6 years now. It's a small, costly yellow brick house. It has a rather large backyard. The first night I stayed there, I had strange dreams about a young girl. She was no younger than at least 6. I only had these dreams for a day or two, but much stranger things began to happen in my conscious world that soon terrified me. I'm a person who loves to sing, so on a sunny day, home alone, doing some chores, I start to sing aloud to myself. I'm walking around the house singing while I'm doing laundry and things. After a while I start humming, then I completely stop singing. No more than 5 minutes after I stopped, I started to hear the same song I was singing, faintly in my attic. I stopped what I was doing and started to listen. The voice was much higher than mine, so I could tell she was a little girl. The song started to get louder. I started to freak, then remembered the girl in my dreams. Remembering what my stepfather had told me about spirits, I reacted. He believed that if you told them to go, calmly and unafraid, they would be compelled to leave you. I started to think and say aloud, "Leave me, you are not wanted here." Soon the voice got fainter, and the song faded from the house. Still to this day, occasionally when I'm alone, I'll sing to myself. No voice is heard, no song of innocence. The girl had left my home, but resided in my mind from then on. Story 3. It was a hot June at my grandparents' house and very boring. I desperately needed something to do. It is such a joy staying with old people. The town she lives in isn't that big. It is called Kermit. I really didn't think anything cool was going to happen that summer. I gave up all hopes of fun and excitement. It was late at night, and I decided to go to sleep in the last room in the back of the house with my little sister. She woke up saying she heard noises, but I didn't pay attention to her and went back to bed. Whoever listens to their younger siblings. I woke up a little later and saw a figure of a person standing by the bedroom door. It just kept on looking at me and was probably standing there all night. I even kept covering my head thinking it would go away. A childish act, I know. At least it helped a little bit. Then my little sister woke up and said, "Who is standing by the bed?" The shadow just moved from the door to the bed. Then it was morning and I told my grandma what happened, but she wouldn't listen. I felt so ignored. So when night came, my sister and I decided to sleep in the living room with my brother. At least if the ghosts attack us, we have an older brother to back us up, or sacrifice himself, whatever comes first. We went to sleep and kept on hearing footsteps, heavy footsteps, and all of a sudden, I saw glowing green eyes. It was impossible for it to come from a car. Besides, my grandma's block is very dark. This time, my brother saw something creepy. He saw someone peeking through the window and immediately shouted, "There's a ghost looking at us." He jumped up and turned on the light, and nothing was there. I sighed. Half of me sort of wanted to push him towards the ghost, then scream my head off while running away, but then again, my mom would have killed me. We would never really know the secrets of those shadows, but to this day, I don't like going back to my grandma's. My parents forced me to, though. I don't think they've seen what I've seen. Story 4. When I was younger, my family and I used to live in an apartment in El Paso. Every night, my little sister would go into the corners and talk to a guy named Bob. She told us Bob used to live here, but I thought it was just her imagination. Then, really late at night, I heard voices. My little sister was sitting by the closet talking to a man. At least, that's how the voices seemed like. It was so creepy that I just left the light on every night until the fear went away. A couple of days later, my parents kept on seeing a shadow of a man in the hall. Then at 3 o'clock in the morning, we heard knocking on the front door. My dad decided to stay up and see who was knocking on the door. He heard the knocking on the door, opened it up, but nobody was there. It was scary since we didn't know who or what was doing the banging. It was also getting worse with my sister talking to Bob. My parents just decided to move and we got a new house. I don't know who lives there now. I'm just really glad I left. I really don't like it that my sister named her huge teddy bear Bob, though. Story 5. A long time ago, when me and my sister were young, we went to visit my aunt. It was going to be her birthday, so our parents made her a surprise party. My sister and I were so bored and we wanted to walk around her street to get some fresh air. I remember it was really dark and cold and nobody really lived by there. As we were walking, we stopped to hear the voices of children. I was 14 at the time and my sister was 8, but the weird thing is when we looked, nobody was there, so we just kept on walking. But I had tripped on something and fell. We looked down and we saw a railroad track. It was so scary because it wasn't there a minute ago. My sister was so scared she started to cry, but I told her it was okay and we would go home. But it wasn't okay. I was lost and I didn't want to tell her and make her cry more. As we were standing there, a little girl and a little boy popped up out of nowhere. They looked pale and scary as if they were dead. I asked them their names and they said Sarah and Jack. I asked them if they knew how to get to a road that would lead us home, and they both helped us. They walked us to the street, and as soon as I saw my aunt's house, I was so happy. I asked them if they wanted to come in, and they just stood there. I ran inside to tell my parents. They just looked at us as if we were crazy, and I pulled my mom to the door to show her the kids that had helped us, but they were gone. We looked for them, but it was as if they'd vanished without a trace. My aunt freaked out when we told her their names, and she told us a story I would never forget. She said a long time ago there was an accident. A bus had broke down on top of railroad tracks. They tried to get out, but the door wouldn't open, and all of a sudden a train was coming. They were trapped, all 17 of them, including the driver, and they all died in a crash. And ever since, people say they see them, and when you park your car on top of the railroad tracks, they push your car out of the way, in case of a train comes. They can save you, and they even have streets named after them. But I couldn't believe it. I looked at my aunt and my sister and stayed quiet all night. The next morning we were ready to go, We said goodbye to my aunt and got in the car. As we left, I saw the names Sarah and Jack on street signs, and ever since that day, I have called them angels. Story 6. My story begins a couple of years ago. I just moved into my new apartment and was beginning a new life as a returning college student, working part-time as a bookkeeper for a grocery store. 2 months pass, my life is pretty much settled into its new routine. One day, after pulling another all-nighter for an exam, I hop into bed shortly before the sun rises, anxious to catch up on my sleep before the start of my first class, which for this particular day wasn't until 1 in the afternoon. It wasn't long before I started to feel myself drifting off, when from out of nowhere I spotted an orange ginger-colored cat skulking around my legs at the foot of my bed. When I tried to move to get a better look at it, though, I found myself paralyzed, to the point I was lying on my side, facing my room directly across from my closet, with my right arm tucked under my pillow. From the corners of my eyes, I could still see the cat. It was small, about the size of a 6-month-old kitten, but I could never see its face. It would always walk out of my line of vision or turn its head just enough so that I could never get a good look at it. For whatever reason, it kept trying to get under my covers, but there was something about this cat that didn't feel right. I didn't think it was there to hurt me, but I felt like it was malicious and dangerous somehow, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it, so I struggled against it. I fought hard, but it was difficult because it felt like something was holding me down from the inside out. The best I could do was to move in short, jerky movements. I tried to yell too, but it was no good. Nothing better than weak moans. Despite this, however, I managed to keep the cat out for a short period of time, until it finally managed to find an opening that I wasn't able to move quickly enough to block off. Watching it sliding under my covers made me panic, and that gave me just enough strength to free my arm from under my pillow. But just as I did, I felt something grab my wrist and push my arm back down just over my head. As the cat disappeared under my blanket, I felt an urge to look towards my closet, and there I saw jet black smoke pouring out from under the cracks. I panicked again, only this time I also became very angry, and I pushed against whatever was holding me down. I don't know if it was from my own power or if this thing just gave in, but I was freed, and the first thing I did was barrel towards the closet door, because in the heat of the moment, I wanted to face whatever was in there, despite being so scared. I was just so enraged. But when I reached my closet and attempted to open the door, it wouldn't budge, and then this horrible mocking laughter filled my head. It was enough to make me dizzy, and I had to take a few steps back until I reached my bed again. I sat down to help regain my equilibrium, but then as I looked up to resurvey my situation, I saw this dark spot forming in the upper right-hand corner of my room. It spread quickly like ink and water, and before I could do anything about it, I blacked out. When I came to again, I was back in bed. The first thing I did was look for that damn cat, but it wasn't there, and neither could I find any evidence that it had ever been there. And when I looked through my closet, everything appeared normal. By this time, it was a little past 8 a.m., and nothing seemed unusual. I got back into bed and sat there for a very long time, trying to determine if what had just happened had only been a very lucid nightmare. It was strange, as I'd never had an experience like that before, and never a dream so real. After a while, with nothing else to go on, I attempted to shrug the experience off as a dream, but I was still shaken and found it hard to relax. I tried to force myself to go back to sleep because I had a long day planned later, but I just lay there staring up at my ceiling for a while, just kind of afraid to close my eyes. About 5 minutes pass. I'm finally beginning to really calm down, and then from the corner of my right eye, I see the orange ginger cat walking by the side of my head. Before I can react to it, I feel its tail hit me right under my chin. I leapt up in my bed into a full standing position, but the cat was nowhere to be found. To this day, I still question whether my experience had been real or just a very vivid hallucination, but the feel of that cat's tail on my skin remains a very constant reminder of that moment of my life. Since then, I have never had a similar experience.
Story 7. It started when I woke up thirsty and needed something to drink so I can go back to sleep. I started to move and all that moved was my head. I then noticed that there were hands on my shoulders that felt strong enough to hurt me if they wanted to. I laid my head back down and started thinking, and when I did, every hair on the back of my neck and all the way down my back stood up like I had been shocked by something. I then, with all my strength, threw myself up and hands lifted me, restraining me, but also pushing me as if it wanted to give me a sign, but it let go and that's all that happened. A couple of years ago, I was sitting on my porch and got the same feeling. When I looked up, there was a dog walking towards me with blood-red eyes. I blinked to see if it was real, and when I blinked, it was standing 3, maybe 4 feet away from me. The weird thing was that the dog was about 20 feet away from me before I blinked. I blinked again, and it vanished before my eyes. I now believe deeply in ghosts, but I never thought it would actually touch me. Story 8. One of my best friends rented an old, very large 2-story house with wooden floors and a large staircase entrance in the front and a small one in the back. There were around 6 of us that lived in the house. We had parties all the time there. One night, in the back of the house, some girls started to look up at the windows of the house and did not want to go in. They said they were scared. I said, "It's a big house, but nothing bad in there." I never felt a bad spirit. Well, we all partied, then I went to sleep. I woke up and saw a black shadow on top of me. I looked around in the room, and my friends were asleep. I saw a black shadow of a face in front of me, and a ringing in my ear, and a buzzing sound. Then I couldn't move. I could see the shadow and said, "Get off my chest." Then it let me go and floated towards the door, then went through it. I then got up and walked to my friend's bedroom and woke him up and said, "You won't believe what happened." He said, "You saw the ghost? It watches me every night." I freaked out because we partied the night before at our house. We had a bunch of people over and he woke up out of a deep sleep and I woke him up and he never told me about a ghost at the house. He wakes up, looks at me and how scared I was, and it's daylight outside, and did not ask me what happened. He just said, "You saw the ghost. It watches me every night. It stands by the door and watches me." My jaw dropped. I just couldn't believe what happened. I always heard marbles rolling on the ceiling and creaks throughout the house after that, but nothing at the house ever happened again like that. Story 9. A few nights ago I was chatting away with my friends on MySpace. I was the only one awake and was already a little shaken up by the creaks that the house made. I silently sat back to take a breath when I heard the panting of a dog. Freaked out, I turned around quickly to look and see if one of my dogs had wandered into the room. Then there was a heavy, moist breath on my foot, along with the panting noise of a dog. Scared nearly half to death, I ran downstairs and crawled into my bed. Sure, my imagination pulls tricks on me, but not that good at tricks. You may say, whatever, I'm just a young kid, but I know what I heard and what I felt. Since then, my mom had told me she had heard the scratching of a dog on a door when all of our dogs were inside. Many other things have happened here in our old house, and I'm glad that we're moving out of it. I mean, my sister seen an old lady, a man, and a little girl, plus 2 ghost dogs. That's just plain crazy for us to stay living there. Therefore, we're moving out. That's final. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.